And really of your own will and leave some of the happiness you bring.
For more than a century, the vampire has lived in the shadows of cinema. Sometimes a nightmare, sometimes a forbidden lover, sometimes a tragic immortal searching for meaning in an endless night. Few creatures in film have changed shape as dramatically as the vampire. And yet the heart of the vampire has remained the same. A reflection of human fear, a symbol of desire, a mirror we are secretly afraid to look into. From the crooked silhouette of Nosferatu creeping up a staircase in 1922 to the shimmering neon-drenched immortals of modern prestige television, vampires continue to evolve with every new generation of storytelling. We reshape them, we fear them, we fall in love with them, and we keep returning to them because in their faces we see something familiar, something unsettling, something deeply human. This documentary takes you on a journey through the entire cinematic evolution of vampires from 1922 to 2025. It follows the rise of silent horror, the Gothic beauty of Universal monsters, the romantic pull of Christopher Lee, the tragic immortals of the 90s, the explosive action era of the 2000s, and the thoughtful reinventions that carry the vampire into our modern landscape. Every era tells us something new about ourselves. This is the story of how vampires became one of the most enduring creations in film history. A creature that never stays the same, yet never truly disappears. Now enter the darkness with me as we begin where it all started. When cinema was still young and the world was learning to dream through moving images, a single figure appeared from the shadows and changed horror forever. Nosferatu, a creature that did not hide its monstrosity, a creature that looked more like pestilence than seduction. F.W. Murnau's 1922 masterpiece brought the vampire into the world with a presence that felt ancient, silent, and unsettling. Max Schreck's performance created a character with sunken eyes, elongated fingers, and a movement style that was more ghostly than human. This early vampire was not a lover. He was a plague. Audiences had never seen anything like him. Nosferatu embodied the fear of disease, the fear of contamination, and the fear of foreign threats. The film came at a time when Europe was still emotionally shaken by war and influenza. The world had witnessed death on an impossible scale. Nosferatu walked that trauma directly into the frame. Every shadow, every silhouette, every moment of his slow ascent up the staircase felt like a memory of the darkness audiences had just survived. Early silent horror used expressionist shadows instead of dialogue. This forced viewers to confront fear in its purest form. It created an emotional connection that needed no words. When Nosferatu spread his claws across sleeping victims, the scene spoke for every anxiety of the era. The vampire became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that danger often comes quietly. A decade later, cinema introduced a different kind of vampire, one that would redefine the creature for generations. Bela Lugosi's Dracula arrived in 1931 with a style that was elegant, controlled, and hypnotic. Unlike Nosferatu, Lugosi's Dracula looked human. He wore a cape. He stood tall. He spoke with calm authority. He carried an unnerving mix of charm and danger. Lugosi created a template that would linger in the cultural imagination for the next 70 years. Where Nosferatu represented fear of contagion, Dracula represented fear of seduction. The vampire became someone who could walk into a room, captivate you, and claim your life with a whisper. Early audiences recognized the forbidden thrill. Dracula was a monster hidden inside refinement, a warning that danger can appear beautiful. These first cinematic vampires built the foundation for everything that followed. They taught audiences to see the vampire as a creature that could shift between horror and desire. They showed us how film could use shadow and silence to build tension. And they firmly planted the vampire as a figure that expresses the fears of its time. But the creature was only beginning its evolution. As Hollywood entered the golden age of the Universal monsters, the vampire transformed once again. The world was recovering from the Great Depression and edging toward another global conflict. Fear was changing. Audiences wanted escape. They wanted fantasy. They wanted stories that carried mystery rather than despair. Universal Studios stepped forward and reshaped the vampire into a more polished and romantic figure. Films like Dracula's Daughter, Son of Dracula, and later the Hammer horror revival with Christopher Lee began a new chapter for the undead. This era blended fear with beauty. The vampire became a figure of forbidden fascination, someone audiences feared but could not look away from. Christopher Lee, in particular, reshaped the character for the modern age. He was commanding, fierce, magnetic, and strangely tragic. His presence suggested deep loneliness beneath the violence. He made the vampire feel ancient yet restless, dangerous yet mournful. His version of Dracula was not the stiff aristocrat of earlier films. He was the Gothic embodiment of passion and terror blended together. These decades were filled with strict cinematic rules around sexuality, violence, and morality. Filmmakers found creative ways to slip subtext into their stories. The vampire became a symbolic figure for everything audiences were not allowed to discuss openly. Addiction, repression, forbidden desire, sexual autonomy, the fear of outsiders, the longing for escape from rigid social expectations. When a vampire leaned close to a victim's neck, audiences understood the deeper meaning even if the censors did not. The bite became a symbol for temptation and surrender, for crossing boundaries, for stepping into territory that society warned against. The vampire was no longer just a monster. It was an idea. This era also introduced the slow romanticization of immortality. Films began to play with the idea that living forever could be lonely rather than enviable. The vampire was trapped in time, unable to evolve, forced to watch the world change around him. These seeds of longing and tragedy would bloom wildly in decades to come. By the end of the mid-20th century, the cinematic vampire had traveled far from its monstrous origins. It was now beautiful, mysterious, and filled with symbolic meaning. But the creature still had a much deeper transformation ahead. The 90s changed everything. Cinema entered an era of emotional complexity, visual ambition, and bold character depth. Audiences were ready for richer stories, ready to explore the psychology of monsters, ready to fall in love with the darkness. The vampire stepped into this new world and immediately transformed. Films like Bram Stoker's Dracula, Interview with the Vampire, The Lost Boys, and Near Dark redefined the creature for a generation. In 1994, Interview with the Vampire offered something cinema had never seen before, a vampire story told with emotional intimacy. Louis, Lestat, Claudia, and the characters who surrounded them brought a new form of tragedy to the genre. Their lives were filled with pain, longing, and moral struggle. The story looked at immortality not as power, but as a curse, a gift that isolates and erodes the soul. It revealed the vampire as a creature who loves deeply, yet lives in eternal conflict with desire and conscience. This film is often credited with humanizing the vampire on screen. It gave the undead a heart, a voice, a grief that felt familiar. Audiences saw themselves reflected in the sadness, the yearning, and the search for meaning. Bram Stoker's Dracula celebrated the Gothic romance of the genre with sweeping emotion and grand visual ambition. Gary Oldman's performance captured passion, heartbreak, and terrifying hunger in equal measure. This movie confirmed that the vampire could be poetic and frightening at the same time. It embraced beauty without losing the darkness. The Lost Boys brought youthful rebellion and 80s style to the genre. Vampires became symbols of freedom, of danger wrapped in charisma, a seductive escape from ordinary life. The film captured the energy of teenage identity and the thrill of being drawn toward the forbidden. Near Dark blended horror with Western grit, portraying vampires as drifters and lonely wanderers. It showed them as tragic nomads searching for family in a world that feared them. Together, these films reshaped the entire emotional landscape of the vampire. The creature was no longer a simple monster or a Gothic symbol. It was now a mirror for human sorrow, desire, identity, and isolation. This era established the foundation modern audiences still connect with today. The vampire had officially stepped out of mythology and into psychological storytelling. As cinema approached the new millennium, audiences began craving speed, intensity, and adrenaline. Action films were rising. Visual effects were growing. The vampire adapted once again, this time with explosive energy. Blade arrived in 1998 and changed everything. Wesley Snipes created a character who was fearless, fierce, and unforgettable. The film blended martial arts, nightclub atmospheres, and vampire mythology into a world that felt new and thrilling. Blade brought the vampire into modern culture with swagger and strength. It proved the undead could be heroes and villains at the same time. Blade also opened the door to an entirely new style of vampire film, one filled with combat, mythology building, and kinetic movement. Instead of whispered seduction or Gothic sorrow, this era delivered action that felt alive and powerful. The Underworld series expanded the idea even further. It gave audiences full vampire societies, ancient rivalries, and stylized visual storytelling. The franchise created a world where vampires were locked in eternal conflict with werewolves. Each film added layers of lore, bloodlines, secret histories, political factions. These stories presented the vampire as a soldier, a revolutionary, and a creature shaped by war rather than romance. This action-driven era appealed to audiences who loved fantasy and spectacle. It created a sense of momentum that carried vampire cinema into the 21st century. Filmmakers realized the vampire was incredibly adaptable. It could be tragic or terrifying, beautiful or brutal, intimate or explosive. The vampire was becoming one of the most flexible figures in film. As the world entered the 21st century, vampire stories began to evolve again. Audiences were ready for complexity, ready for nuance, ready for stories that blended mythology with emotion. The vampire became a vessel for deeper questions. Shows and films explored identity, morality, addiction, trauma, and survival. The vampire was no longer simply hunted. It was examined, understood, portrayed with empathy. Modern storytellers began to explore the human side of immortality with a level of emotional truth that earlier decades never attempted. Prestige television took the genre further. Interview with the Vampire returned as a series that brought intense emotional depth, cultural awareness, and intimate character study. It looked at immortality through the lens of trauma, love, memory, and the cost of living forever. The show used the vampire as a metaphor for identity and history. Other modern interpretations explored themes like found family, mental health, social isolation, and the desire to belong. The vampire became a compassionate monster, a figure we felt for rather than feared. Its pain became the emotional center of the story. Even comedic and lighthearted interpretations contributed to the evolution by showing how versatile the vampire can be without losing its symbolic foundation. The vampire remained appealing because it remained relatable. It expressed something raw and universal. The fear of time, the longing for connection, the struggle to find meaning in a world that keeps changing. By 2025, the vampire had become one of the most adaptable creations in cinema. It could shift between genres with ease. Horror, romancy, action, drama, fantasy, tragedy, comedy. The vampire survived because it reflected whatever society was feeling at the time. And society always has something to fear, something to desire, something to question, which means the vampire will never die. The vampire has walked through every corner of cinema, shifting shape with every generation. It began as a nightmare from the silent era, became a Gothic symbol of forbidden desire, transformed into a tragic immortal filled with longing, stepped into the spotlight of action and spectacle, and finally evolved into a complex mirror of humanity itself. We keep telling vampire stories because we keep seeing ourselves inside them. The vampire is fear, desire, loneliness, power, beauty, pain, It is the part of us we try to hide and the part of us we secretly want to explore. And that is why the undead will always rise again. This is Strange Flick Facts, where we explore the truth behind your favorite characters and the stories that shaped cinema. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.